Kelly, you're the executive director of the Association of Cities. What sort of conversations have you been having with lawmakers so far this session?
Oh, wow. We've had a lot of different conversations, a wide variety. A lot of them have been around property taxes. After last year's House Bill 389, there have been discussions about how we fix some of the problems from that legislation, but also how do we still address the needs for property tax. But there's been a lot of other bills proposed around cybersecurity, mask mandates, monument removals, etc. So we've actually been very, very busy already this session.
And last week on the show, we had a pair of county assessors to talk about the conversation about property taxes from a county level. You two are mayors of cities here in the Treasure Valley, one somewhat urban, one very rural. What sort of things are you seeing? We'll start with John.
Well, we're seeing the challenges of growth. How do we pay for it? The demand for services is increasing. At the same time, there's a resistance to increasing budgets from legislators. So we're in a bit of a balancing act. It takes a certain amount of dollars to fund police and fire and parks and libraries. And I think the issue is how do we fund those things and still create some relief to the property taxpayer. And that's really the challenge we're dealing with in the fast-growing areas.
And Mayor Holton, what are you seeing in Greenleaf?
Well, for the smaller cities, any kind of growth proportionally is giant. And so for the city of Greenleaf, we're looking at a poised subdivision to request annexation. And so that will be 1/3 of the size of the city that it exists. So if that was Boise, you would be talking about 85,000 or greater subdivision that's asking to come in. And so with the changes that the legislature has instituted, growth cannot pay its way. So the city will have to make very difficult decisions, and that impacts growth. And for the city of Greenleaf, we have a water sewer system that we have paying back to the state, and that was all designed off of growth. And right now they've shot us in the foot. So we're in a quandary. How do we pay for our loan and yet not be able to bring in new growth because it's not paying its way, and the existing city residents would have to help supplement new growth, which is a bitter pill to swallow.
That's a phrase we hear around the State House all the time, is growth should pay for growth. So Mayor Evans, you mentioned police, fire, parks, libraries as kind of these bare bones services that cities provide. Is that really the majority of your budget? Because it seems like there's perhaps a misconception around the State House that cities and local governments are spending massive amounts of money on projects that they don't really need to.
Yeah, well, don't really need to is a relative term. And that's why we have local government. You've got local people that elect local leaders, and they have an opportunity, particularly in Idaho, where most of our cities are small. Everybody's a big fish in the pond. So you can rely on pretty much that cities are providing what's being demanded of them by their voters. So, but it is the basics. There's 199 cities in Idaho. Garden City has a population of a little over 12,000, and we're the 21st largest city in the state. 2/3 of our cities have a population of 1,000 or less. So it's kind of, most of us are meat and potatoes, and the dessert maybe is rare in our budgets.
Absolutely.
And let me interject a little bit from a small city where everybody knows everybody. Everyone within city limits knows where my house is, and they know how to get a hold of me and what my habits are. And so it's the most accountable level of government, yet we have a legislature that keeps thinking that they know best, they know better than my residents. And when's the last time you heard a recall on a state legislator? But you can typically, year after year, there's a recall on a city councilman or a mayor because they're very transparent, they're very accountable, and we're where the rubber meets the road. If there is a form of government that has to answer on a daily basis to the people, we are it.
That's right. In the grocery stores.
Oh, yes,
At
yeah.
events, everywhere. You're right.
everywhere.
You govern right in the face of the people that elected you.
Yep.
You're right.
And Kelly, your organization represents cities across Idaho from Bonners Ferry to Bear Lake. What sort of things are you hearing from outside of the Treasure Valley?
The services don't change regardless of the size. Everyone needs streets to drive on, right? To get to work, to make sure the economy continues to happen. They need sidewalks and crosswalks and safe ways for kids to get to school and to get to parks and so forth or other events. They need those parks that the kids are going to be maintained and safe and well taken care of. And most importantly, they need the emergency services provided in the times that are needed, right? Nobody wants to have a firefighter come to their house, but if you need it, you want them to show up in a timely manner. Same with the police or the ambulance and EMTs, et cetera. And so those, as Mayor Evans said, those bare bones meat and potato needs don't change regardless of the size. They're always there. Sometimes in your larger communities, you find additional asks from the citizens, like for green belts or golf courses or airstrips, municipal airports, et cetera. But the bare bones are the same across the board. The other thing, and one of the reasons I believe that the association really exists, is when you talk about those small cities that don't have staff. They have one clerk, they have a maintenance guy, maybe a maintenance guy and a half, right? That are running the city because their part-time mayor and part-time councilors all have full-time jobs doing something else. And yet those services still need to exist and function in an efficient and effective way for the citizens. Those people need help. That's limited staff resource. And so we're there to help kind of extend that resource a little bit, but also to help with programming that meets other needs like suicide prevention and drug prevention and literacy and other things that every community also needs, that mayors and council members stay up at night trying to figure out how to address.
How to pay for it.
Yeah, there's the risk management component. You know,
bet.
most of us are insured by ICRIMP. And I'm a board member there, and reducing your risk, liability risk with HR and operations in your public works and police and fire and all kinds of things. So there's just a lot of components, again, that are involved in that rubber meets the road that isn't diluted. An individual legislator is one of 105 in the cities represented here today. You've got one mayor and 4 council members, and the nuts and bolts have to get dealt with at our level.
And speaking of those 105 lawmakers, let's bring the conversation back to them. We referenced House Bill 389, which was the big property tax proposal from a year ago. We'll start with Kelly. What do you think what would you say that the legislature has done that's been harmful to cities' growth in recent years?
Local governments were allowed prior to House Bill 389 to take 100% of new construction, 100% of annexation, 100% of urban renewal areas, as well as have an increase on their existing base in order to meet the needs of services. And when you talk about new construction, annexation, and urban renewal areas, you're talking about areas that have either been newly introduced or improved, right? That are going to be now helping with the tax burden for the services needed to meet the residents' expectations in any given community. Well, with House Bill 389, they said now you can only have 90% of new construction and annexation and only 80% of urban renewal. So if you really want new growth to pay for itself, then why would you reduce it down to 90%? That means 10% of what came in can't be used to actually meet the needs of that new growth. So that was one error that we felt was introduced and then passed by House Bill 389, and I think it hamstrings locals. The other piece was that 8% cap, because it's all relative, right? Mayor Holton was just talking about the fact that in some communities, one home would put you over that 8% cap, right? So what does a community do?
For Greenleaf this year, in realness, it's going to be 3 homes will exceed the 8% cap. The 3 homes that'll finish during this calendar year that we know of has already exceeded the 8% and will go upside down. And so it's a bill, whether they intended it or not, is of defund the police, defund the fire. And it's real people in Caldwell and Nampa. Several fire positions and several police positions are not funded because of that bill this year.
Other than property taxes, what other funding options are there available to cities that come from the state level?
We share sales tax revenues on a formulaic basis. We get, if you have a liquor store in town, there's a portion of the liquor revenues that are generated in your town that come back. Some cities have franchise fees, but property tax, within 10% one way or the other, property tax makes up about half of the general revenues that a city gets. So it's far and away the biggest piece of the pie. So if the idea is to force efficiencies, the downturn took care of that from 2012 that 4 or 5 year stretch there. We're all pretty lean and mean now. So, I think a lot of it's just, it's kind of hard to walk in somebody else's shoes sometimes. And legislators, I think, are well intended, but I think you don't know what you don't know. They're forced to make decisions in a very short period of time, frankly, down there. 389 went from an RS to the governor's desk in 48 hours, basically. So the reaction time, the time to get input, the time to properly vet, it makes it hard. And of course, Kelly, jump in there.
I was just going to say, except having lived in those shoes, while I agree they usually only have about a 3-month period. I mean, they're not restricted. The Constitution just says they can't leave until the work is done, right? Mm-hmm. There's plenty of time. They're a legislator for a full 2 years. There's plenty of time to work in the interim with people. And quite often when I was there, that's what we would do. People would bring issues to me and others that I served with, and if we could do it in a reasonable and thoughtful and effective way within that 3-month period that usually happens, great. But there's 9 other months in the year where we can work in the interim together with stakeholders to make sure we have a good bill and bring it back the following year. While I know some of these are critical situations, the property tax crisis didn't happen overnight. And there were plenty of years that they could have been working with cities and counties and everybody all at the same time to vet these ideas and work on them to make sure that we had a thoughtful approach and a thoughtful solution overall.
Right. And I think I'll interject that there's 44 counties. I can speak about Canyon County, one of the larger ones population-wise. 66 political subdivisions, from cemetery districts to irrigation to school districts to cities. Most all of your city's residents' tax bill, the city will typically be 3rd or 4th largest. School's going to be the greatest, and their bonds, and then next to county, typically the city might be 3rd or 4th. We are the target because we are the property tax, but there's other political subdivisions that are part of the responsibility for the taxes being collected by the county. And so we are just an easier target because we have an office. Your cemetery district's not going to have an office. Most people are clueless where their irrigation district office is at, but yet it's part on the tax roll. And so taxes are extremely complicated, and I don't belittle the legislators for seeing a large city problem and saying, well, if we write this out in code, we've solved it, and not even seeing 198 other cities that are in the state that are so much not in that ballpark that it's reactionary. It's writing law to a situation and not for across the state.
So what sort of things have, whether it's the Association of Cities or the Interim Property Tax Committee that's been meeting, what are some promising proposals? I know you have talked about the tax relief fund with me a little bit. What sort of things could the legislature do to help you guys out?
I'm glad you brought that specific fund up because I've asked multiple legislators why they don't dissolve that Wayfair fund, right? The tax relief fund, and allow those online sales tax revenues and out-of-state purchase revenues to come through the formula, the sales tax formula. If they were to do that, especially since it's the largest component of sales tax growth, revenue growth in the state currently, that would help reduce the reliance of locals on property tax.
Big time.
That would increase the revenues in that one stream that we use to provide these services, which means we wouldn't have to use as much of the other stream that seems to be in such a critical situation right now for homeowners.
And that Wayfair fund is a special account that collects sales taxes on specifically purchases from out-of-state sellers and marketplace facilitators. So it's kind of turned into just a special tax projects account for the legislature. And from the city's perspective, it would be better to put that tax relief money to local governments just as regular sales taxes?
Well, the full amount wouldn't come to us, though. I think we get 11.7%
Right.
of sales tax revenues.
Yeah.
So if you put that $130 million that's last year that went into that bucket, and we got our 11.7%, yes, it increases the revenue locals get, but there's not quite 90% going still back to the state general fund that could still be used for all these other projects. I mean, if you look at it, in the table that I looked at, there was $235 million in that bucket, and 204 was just used for the income tax. Our share, that 11.7, would have still left money on the table for the state to use even after the big income tax break and us getting our portions. So it could still be used to help in both areas.
Yeah, the sales tax collections really get chopped up. I have it printed out here. It's about 6 pages long. The number of times they've changed it is a whole half page by itself.
Right.
go.
In
Right.
small print.
Put the
Well, this
bold
has
print,
been a
give
great
it the fine print,
conversation.
take it away.
We are out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining me today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
It's our
Logan.
pleasure.
Thank you.